with life, Maria.
Immediately around in the United States in years previous, given the idea that maybe this is just an extinct animal that never actually went extinct and is existing in the forest of the United States. The Potomsky crater is in reference to a giant crater-like structure found in Siberia. What's interesting is this, while it may look like a crater on first viewing, is anything but. It is a giant rock structure that just perfectly matches the shape of it, and what's even weirder is that the area immediately around the crater is very much overgrown as compared to the woods around it. Now, while this may lead you to think radiation, there are no highly active radiation in the area. The nearby tribe, the Yakut, has said that it is a place that people do not travel or else they get sick and die, and have even named the area Fire Eagle's Nest. One of the only research groups to ever go and try to take a look at it, because remember it's in the middle of Siberia, in 2005 had their leader die of a heart attack upon approaching it, and there hasn't been much research since. So, yeah, make your own conclusions about that. Thomas Pynchon was an author that is still alive and is most known for his books he wrote in the 1960s. It would take way too long to explain all of the things that he talked about in his book, but essentially he was a fiction author that used like advanced science as a basis for his stories. More specifically, a concept he is famous for dealing with is that of Maxwell's demon, which is the idea that if you had a very small figure that could individually interact with particles and heat on a microscopic level, it could tip the balance of entropy and make physics work backwards. He used this as a basis for a lot of his books and is known as either having a higher understanding than the average person or creating concepts that are so abstract they've led to several concepts in modern theoretical physics. Animism is just the broad idea of applying a soul or spirit to anthropomorphic objects. That's actually where the idea of anthropomorphism comes from. So essentially you can imprint the idea of a spirit or character onto a physical item enough to the point that it eventually becomes real. The Dighton Rock is a rock that is found off the coast of the Taunton River in New Jersey. What's interesting about this rock is that it looks perfectly normal from a distance, but as you get close to it, you realize there are these very deep inscriptions all over it that do not make sense in any recorded language, and the depictions also don't match up with anything. Theories about this rock have ranged from King Solomon in showing that the depictions of it are that of the Old Testament, or Norse mythology and that it is an entire story of Odin laid out on the rock, but both of those ask the question, then why would this rock show up in New Jersey unless Solomon or something like that arrived at America and brought the stone with them from all that time before? Either way, it's still interesting that it got there with absolutely no recorded history of it being there. Bunkers in Mars is in reference to the fact that the Mars rover caught a few short glimpses in the middle of rock faces on Mars of what seemed to be these windows or cut-out metal places. This is combined with the theory that water originally existed on Mars and says that the planet had a mass extinction event in which everyone had to go underground, and that from looking at the Mars rover's images of the planet of Mars that we can see sort of these last remnants or possibly still living remnants of the Mars population. Triassic mystery is a little too vague for my liking because there are several Triassic mysteries when it comes to missing links and things such as. However, the one that I found the most reference is that of Craterocharodon, which is essentially a giant omnivore that was discovered, and its teeth don't make sense for its skull, and it's supposed to be a sort of missing link, so...
Just switch it on and earn up to 11%. Auto Earn turns on weekly reward.
Teeth don't make sense for its skull, and it's supposed to be a sort of missing link, so yeah, that's it. Montanism comes from a man named Montanus, and was an idea he developed in the 2nd century AD, which essentially says that you can continue to expound on the Bible and get insight through revelation. This was specifically done with him, in which he saw that there would be a soon coming end of times, and started sort of the first cult in this ideology, or at least first known religious cult, in this ideology that God would come back soon, specifically at his church. Ideas of Montanism today are just that Christianity can be expounded upon if people receive direct information from God. The Savic Tomatovic tape, which I believe still translates in Serbian to sandwich tomato, is in reference to a Serbian porn star who claimed that she was roped by a giant spider. No, I'm not kidding on that. It goes more so to say that she was roped by the Jabba Fofi, or Jabba Fofi, which is a cryptid from South America, which is essentially a giant 4-foot wide spider. And while there is evidence to back up that existence, there is no evidence to back up this tape. However, she supposedly became popular in something called Jinky Jinky, which is a Japanese ring of insect-related films, and became a star with costumes and machines in that realm, and I don't want to live on this planet anymore. Marco Rodin was originally a physicist who came up with the concept of the forever electron, and that there's a path that an electron could follow in which it could convert energy without ever losing it, so essentially a forever supplying power source. Since then, he has got very much so into esotericism and went on this long discovery to try to figure out the name of God and the source of God. And through this series of calculations he did, he figured out that the holy number was 9 and that God's name was Abha, A-B-H-A. So, yeah. Operation Paperclip was something that happened after World War II and is now pretty well known, in which 1,600 Nazi scientists were granted U.S. citizenship for their assistance in the American rocket program, and more specifically the space race. The theory goes on to say that the only reason we beat Russia in space is through the help of German scientists. Planck feedback is the idea that as something is heated, it becomes more radioactive, so negative Planck feedback would be the idea that deriving temperature or energy from a system creates more radiation, or in other words, adding heat to it would cancel out the radiation, and it's another one of those sort of like nonsensical concepts in theoretical chemistry that you could remove radiation from a system or destroy it through amount of energy given in or taken out, only backwards. Manichaeism is this 3rd century concept of religion. It essentially applied ideas of Christianity, Gnosticism, and pagan gods all into one. It originated in Persia and is essentially the idea that Christianity can present itself through pagan gods or modern rituals and things such as, and that all of these ideas of supposedly non-religious elements can come together and make the godhead of sorts. So it's essentially combining Christianity with pagan deities. Valis is a novel written by Philip K. Dick, who was a famous science fiction author in the 1980s. Valis stands for Vast Acting Living Intelligence System. Essentially, it is the idea that God is a simulation, or rather we are living through a simulation created by God. However, a lot of his theories apply back to Gnosticism, which again was mentioned in the last theory and several of the theories beforehand. And again, it all relates to that idea of there being a god and lesser gods. So what you could derive from this is that the Valis system itself he wrote about is one of these lesser gods. ICBM decoys has 2 different definitions. The first being that countries that do not have ICBMs will simply have fake ones in order to deter other world powers from attacking. So essentially the whole gun in the paper bag thing. Also, for those that don't know, ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. The other idea of it is that whenever an ICBM is launched, there will be several fakes launched with the real one, just so that whatever system is trying to shoot it down has a lesser chance of actually stopping the missile. Protoa, from everything I can find, is another reference to 4chan. For those that don't know, whenever someone posts on 4chan, their flag of origin and country is shown whenever they do so. For a small window a few years ago, there were a few flags that popped up that had the country listed as Portoa, and had a unique flag that had never been seen before. Immediately afterwards, all those posts disappeared, and 4chan simply acted like it was a glitch that never happened, leading people to believe that Portoa or Portoya is a country that exists in a leading people to believe that Portoa or Portoya is a country that exists in a parallel universe. Tier 5 is the Animaster, and the description reads, "This kind of knowledge is often hidden in plain sight or can be found in very ancient texts after meticulous research that may take dozens of years. From this point on, sane people have a hard time even understanding most of these concepts. The journey starts here. First up, we have Magic of the State, which was a novel written by Michael Taussig. From all the descriptions and summaries I read about the book, it's essentially about this spirit that acts as a queen that goes to this mountain and creates this whole sort of like spiritual realm for people to inhabit in, but that doesn't really matter, because where the conspiracy comes in is the entire idea that this book is a metaphor for the state and governments. And in other words, this whole illusion of magic that this spirit queen creates is similar to how we all simply fall in line with the illusion of the state, and that perceived impermanence of the state is the magic of the state. Crank incident refers to the disappearance of the third Crank movie starring Jason Statham. For those that don't know, Crank is famous for being over the top and insane and violent and edgy, and in a good way. It's like a fun action movie. However, there are two of them, but the third one just all of a sudden, as soon as production was over, disappeared. The online story is that this is because, like, social justice warriors got onto it because, women were depicted very poorly throughout the movies. However, the true version, as the conspiracy states, is that the movie was about Jason Statham exposing Hollywood satanic cults and elitist satanic cults, and him going on a rampage through that. And because of the content of it, that's the real reason that the movie got canned.
Sure.
Sycamore Knoll is in reference to an underground plateau located 6 miles off the coast of Malibu, California. About 2,000 feet underwater, and so predominant that it can even be seen from Google Earth. There is this predominant plateau that sticks up out of the ground, leaving people to think it's an underwater base, even that of extraterrestrial origin. In '95, people started to point at it and figure out it was there, and there was a lot of research happening around that time, and it turns out that this had been kept secret for nearly 40 years. Reactionless drive is in reference to a theory in physics of the propellantless motor, which, if you're familiar with the movie Interstellar, is the ship at the end that manages to move off of its own motion, so without needing any fuel source, and theoretically it could lead to a forever lasting engine that does not require fuel. Theories range on how this could be accomplished. Actually, another thing mentioned later in this episode is a thought process that could lead to a propellantless motor. Most often it has to do with gravity, and the idea that if you can make gravity work in a centrifugal motion, it could be used as a propellant. Enneagram is something that you may be familiar with, as it is a very popular online test that you can take that determines your personality type on a series of numbers 1 through 9, so there are 9 different personality types that you could be. However, the roots of this are a bit more deep than you may think. The origins of Enneagram are traced back to esoteric and mysticism, and it's the idea that it's not just your personality type being determined, but it is the manner by which you can achieve enlightenment. So through this personality test that you can figure out how to find your higher self. Commentary Earth has 2 real theories. The first of which, and the more common one, being that the Earth only exists in the form that it does, or is only possible to exist because of comets. Both the crust exists as fertile grounds because of comets that hit it however many million years ago, or the idea that as comets pass by the Earth, they deliver the necessary nutrients and trace elements that we need in our ecosystem to continue to survive. The other theory is that Earth itself was originally a comet of another system, and the high temperatures led to gas exposure, which led to the conditions needed to create our now planet. Rockmen, or the rock apes, are in reference to a group of Sasquatch-like creatures that were seen by American GIs while in Vietnam. Batututs, as they were called by locals, were so predominant in the area that one mountain that American GIs were stationed on was known as Monkey Mountain, because every patrol that went out came back reporting that they had seen the Rockmen. It was so predominant that in 1974, after the war was over, an NVA general led an entire expeditionary force back into the combat zone that they fought Americans in Vietnam, just to see if they could discover these creatures. And if you're curious about what they would do, they would see people, begin throwing stones at them, and then run away. Some stories even saying that they threw back grenades that the Americans had thrown. Despite this, none were ever caught or no bodies were ever found. It's believed that they lived in the caves and rat tunnels in the Vietnam combat zones. Cap Dwa is the name given to the skeleton of an Argentinian giant, which has been famous for some time throughout history. Not only that, but this 12-foot tall skeleton has 2 heads. And the story goes that in 1673, Spaniards had captured it in Argentina and were bringing it back to Spain. They had it tied to the mast of the ship, to which the giant broke loose, killed 4 sailors, and was eventually killed by the crew, to which the body was brought back and hosted in museums and circuses and things such as. Also, as far as a deeper dive is concerned, there's absolutely going to be one about giants and Agartha and that whole sort of canon of philosophy. I just haven't decided if I want to do them together or separate yet. But there will be one, trust me. So I come to you now with another shame, such as I had with Nexus 7. Protodytes, the word proto means before or original, and dite means small or mite. So I imagine it has something to do with microscopics or biotech, like nanotechnology or something such as, but protodyte is also the name of something from the Bionicle lore. I'm not kidding. So everything I researched just led to that, and I tried, but I could not find anything. So like Nexus 7, this is my second failure. That if one of you can mention in the comments to find out for the correction
they're totally
video,
trying to get you to look up Bionicles.
But I come to you shameful, so sorry about that. Cat nuns is in reference to a group of nuns who were living in a monastery in the Middle Ages of France, who one day, for seemingly no reason, one of the nuns meowed to another, to which that nun meowed back. And then they went and did it to another one, and it got to the point where the entire monastery exclusively communicated through meows. Keep in mind, these nuns were also interacting with people of the town, and anytime they would come out to buy supplies or whatever, they would meow to the people there too. Meow. It got to be such a problem that the town hired the army to come in and threaten to whip the nuns to death if they didn't stop meowing. Meow. And even then, it took some time. This is often chalked up to a case of mass hysteria, as was the dancing plague that I mentioned in the last tier. However, it's still odd that this happened at all. Max Spires was a famous conspiracy theorist from England who claimed that at a young age he was kidnapped to be a part of a government super soldier program, to which he then escaped and became dedicated to outing the British government, which is why labels like conspiracy theorist were thrown on him so often. He spoke at several TED Talks and different conferences about being weary of one's own government, and led people on ideas such as investigating more into whatever the news propagates and things like that. That was until he went to visit his friend in Switzerland, and then while sitting on the couch began throwing up a black liquid and died in his friend's home. The cause of death to this day is still weird, and a day before he died, he texted his mom that he was onto something, and if anything happens to him, to and said at the conference he was giving the next day, he was going to expose several elites that he had found connections to, and then he dies from throwing up black goo, so I'm sure those aren't connected at all. Acoustic attacks is in reference to an event that happened at the American Embassy in Cuba in August of 2017. Several US and Canadian embassy members all of a sudden began feeling these intense pains in their heads where they were unable to think or function, to which they all evacuated the embassy, and it turns out they all suffered severe brain damage. While there was no direct source of this issue, it's believed that acoustic attacks were the culprit, or essentially low frequency or unperceivable attacks of sonic vibrations or sound that lead you to pain or passing out. And we know this technology exists because it's actually used in riot control techniques. This was such a big deal that it led to the term Havana Syndrome, which is in reference to, again, these acoustic attacks. Bloodletting magic is exactly what it says. The idea that satanic or Wiccan rituals that are performed whenever they use blood are more effective than they naturally are. And you can add a layer to that and say the reason that people go disappearing in these elitist screens and things like that is because they need the blood for whatever spells they perform. Google Earth Black Zones is exactly what it says. There are entire regions on Google Earth that are either blurred or completely blacked out. Some of these kind of make sense, like a lot of North Korea's military stuff is blacked out in order to not, you know, cause a panic over that. However, some are much more odd, such as Anthrax Island, Roswell, New Mexico, and the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, why is
So, yeah, make of that what you will. Crowdfunded assassination is, again, exactly what it says. The idea being that whenever there are these large elites, such as a president or a world leader, who is wanting to be assassinated, obviously one person can't fund it, but on the deep web, there's these pots that people throw money into, and when it reaches a certain amount, an assassin is hired to take that person out. And, of course, the conspiracy goes on to say this is all done through crypto, it's completely untraceable, done with aliases, and it leads to the idea that thousands, if not tens of thousands of people contribute towards these group killings. Serpent seed is another belief in the now multiple times mentioned Gnostic religion. The belief essentially says that in the Garden of Eden, whenever Satan appeared to Eve in the form of a serpent, that he mated with her and the resulting child was Cain. The idea being that as sin entered the world, and of course Cain was the first murderer, it all came from this literal seed of the devil. An opticon is an architectural design that was theorized by Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. The idea for it being, it was supposed to be designed as a prison in which every single cell member could be watched from one position by 1 yard in a chair. However, the catch to it was the cells were built in such a way that the prisoners could not tell at what time they were being watched. They just know that there was a potential that they could be watched, and therefore you could control a much larger population with a much smaller group of people. Bantham then went on to say this could be applied to hospitals, schools, other education centers, and obviously it's now used as an analogy to talk about the state and totalitarianism.
And D's nuts, as I got an interception.
In which the few govern the many. The Inunaki village is a story that goes like this. In Japan during the Edo period that lasted from 1603 to 1868, there was a village in the mountains that decided they did not want to be a part of the Japanese government and decided to become secluded to themselves. It was then figured out by outsiders that this was done in order to practice the occult, such as blood rituals and sacrifices and things such as. And this eventually led to an incident in which someone in the town slaughtered 33 people during one of these rituals. Because of this, the Japanese government at the time decided to take the village off of every map and simply cut off all roads and seclude it to itself. Now when walking up the Inunaki mountain, there is a sign that can be seen off the road which reads, "Japanese regulations and constitutions do not apply here." What's even creepier about this village, more than any just standard haunted ghost town, is the theory says that these people are still alive, and after hundreds of years of inbreeding and demonic practice, they've become these subhuman monsters that kill and cannibalize anyone that walks up the mountain. It also hurts my feelings that Suicide Forest gets as much attention as it does, when I think stuff like this is way cooler. Prana release has to do with prana, which is a popular subject of Eastern philosophy theory. Prana is, as far as I can equate it to, sort of a life force, which people can adopt and take on themselves and then express in different ways. Kind of like aura or key energy, if you're familiar with those concepts. Several theories that I found say that upon death, all of the prana that is stored in the body is released. And this is sort of what some philosophies consider to be a soul, but it goes a step forward in saying that those around you at your time of death can absorb that prana and therefore be taking in part of your essence. 24-hour year could be in reference to two separate things. One of them could be the actual idea that every 24 hours we experience a full rotation around the sun, and that the Earth's rotation is baloney. Other theory being that there is supposedly, according to legend, a 24-hour time slot that is missing from our historical record, which can be explained using the books of Isaiah and Joshua in the Old Testament of the Bible, in which God stopped the earth for a total of 24 hours during a battle Joshua had and a prayer that Isaiah had. Not sure which one this is referring to, so there's both, and just pick one, I guess. Corporate's kill list is exactly what it says. There are certain people who corporations have a problem with, because even if they compete with each other on the market, they definitely have an understanding with each other when it comes to the deep state. Therefore, there are certain people that they want dead. Max Spies, which I mentioned earlier, would absolutely be an example of that. The Man from Earth was a book written in 1983 by Jordan R. Dixon. The concept of this book was later adapted into a Star Trek episode by Jerome Bixby, and then later a movie by the same name. The plot of the story is that a man experience living through the life of Christ and the rise of humanity and Babylon and all the empires falling to the present day. The theory in this is that the original author, George R. Dixon, actually is either this man himself or experiencing it, and theories range with his predictions of history and his discrepancies that have happened throughout history. But pretty much the idea that Gordon used this book as a way to sort of confess to the readers of his true nature. Interdimensional Bigfoot's exactly what it says.
Interdimensional
Bigfoot universes will also be familiar with the idea of portals, the idea that there could be beings that could willingly transport between dimension to another, which would explain why something like Bigfoot has never been seen. There are also symptoms that occur with these interdimensional portals, such as fauna changing and certain acoustic vibrations in the air. And looking at throughout history, this can not only explain Bigfoot sightings, but also things such as Mothman's appearance and other various cryptids, saying that maybe they're not just creatures like animals as we think of them, but more like these higher order interdimensional beings. Organic Black Helicopters has two different stories behind it, one of which being the idea that there are these black helicopters that can be seen passing over, especially the United States very often, that don't have any identity markings of what country of origin they belong to. They normally fly in groups, and they never have any distinguishable pilots. The idea of this being that this is an alien creature or some kind of cloaking mechanism, especially since these are normally sighted around the time of UFOs appearances. The other theory being that there are these microscopic nanobots that look like helicopters that are injected into people's bloodstreams and at any moment will cause people to turn into a helicopter.
Yeah. Is that my neighbor?
Moving on. Manatees or humans are exactly what it says. The main idea being that back in history at some point there's a branching off point between humans and manatees, and that's why there are similar features between the two. However, the further statement of this is that manatees are either the descendants of some Atlantean sea people or even cursed sailors who were lost at sea and became so accustomed to it that their bodies were transformed through magic and witchcraft into manatees. The John Titor Project was a reference to forum posts that took place between 2000 and 2001. In these, a man who said his name was John Titor said he was from the year 2036 and he had come back in time to retrieve an old computer that can properly do simple code in order to fix a problem in the modern day. Some believe this to be the now recognized Unix 2038 problem, which would oddly make sense for someone in 2000 to say, claiming to be a time traveler. From that, John Titor answered several questions, saying that there would be a civil war in the United States, a brief but deadly World War III, and would eventually lead to a new prosperous age of technology and industrialization. Russian crime dungeons was hard to find any information on. I think this is referring to gulags, which for those who don't know is essentially these Russian prisons or dungeons in which political prisoners most often are thrown in indefinitely and sort of left to fend for themselves in order to survive. So it's sort of like literally throwing people into a hole so that they're not a problem to you anymore. Universal communion is a concept in predominantly Catholicism that communion can be taken by everyone of every religion. They don't necessarily have to be Catholic. However, I do have to mention that in research for this, even on Catholic sites, I found several mentions of the exact phrase New World Order of Christianity and all religions coming together. So I'm guessing this is an idea amongst elitists that all religions can be combined into one through the idea of universal communion. There Are No Forests is actually a very poetic one that I am a fan of, even if I don't necessarily believe it. It's the idea that every forest as we know it is not a forest and simply the small sprouts or stems of what are really trees. Well, then what are really trees? All the mountains that we see, from mountain ranges to plateaus, are the shaved off tops of trees, and the trees that grow up from them are just sort of like the grass sprouting out from its cracks. It gives this beautiful idea that the world used to be a giant, magnificent forest, and that something caused all of that to be destroyed. The theory goes on to say that rocks, as we know them, are simply the pebbles of what used to be rocks. And again, this whole idea that the earth used to be this giant utopia that's been lost. Asian blood types is in reference to the idea that in Asian culture, specifically Korean culture, blood types are often used as a basis to determine one's personality. From everything I read on this, it's kind of similar to how in the United States people base personalities, or some people base personalities off of their astrological sign. So this is sort of like the Asian equivalent of that. Ghost condensate is kind of difficult to explain. This is the theory that I mentioned earlier when talking about the reactionless drive. I'm going to try to quickly summarize. So from my understanding, a ghost in a physics spectrum
is a 9-hour video.
Number or factor that cannot be determined and sort of appears on its own. So it is like the in-between variable whenever you're trying to figure out how a system works.
Needless to say, we're going to be live for a long
would be
time.
A byproduct of that contributes a little more energy than originally thought because of factors we can't take into account. The theory with ghost condensate is that if it is harnessed correctly, this little bit of power can be recycled on itself over and over and over and eventually create a reactionless drive. See, what do y'all need college for when you got me?
Hell yeah.
Philosophy that is very, very closely related to iMedia,
like I said, I'm probably going to watch the series
for religion, and it all has to do with prana, which I mentioned earlier. The idea of Breatharianism being that if someone balances their ki right and properly figures out how to withstand their own body's state of homeostasis, they can survive with no food and in some cases even no water. There's people who've done very in-depth videos on it, better than I can, but essentially there have been people who have gone months at a time under surveillance without eating or drinking, while at the same time there have been total fakes who have said they haven't ate in years, and then someone finds a picture of them at Thanksgiving eating. So yeah, it goes both ways. Famously, breatharianism is known as a pseudoscience because several people who have tried a diet of nothing have died, non-surprisingly, and obviously casted doubt onto this entire philosophy. Memphis rap is a brand of rap that originates from Memphis. The original name for most of this is 404, as a lot of the music is composed of noises, has lyrics that discuss murder and suicide and other heavy concepts. It gives an overall feeling of creepy, with most people who listen to it describing that they feel like they're not supposed to be doing it. The 3-6 Mafia, which is now a famous rap group, and if you think about the name 3-6 or 666 Mafia, was one of the pioneers of this genre, and with their original tracks having lyrics such as the daughter of the devil and talking of Satanism and rituals and things such as. Idea being that Memphis rap is either a confession of demonic events or sort of a inner look at it. The Ural Relief Map, or as it's also known, the map of the creator,
I don't know why they're on the
a white stone slab that was found in 1995. While doing research in the Ural Mountains, a Russian researcher discovered these texts from the 18th century that said there were several stone slabs that were used as maps of the area. The researchers then went out to try to discover whatever the stone slab was and came upon a small village in the Ural Mountains that brought towards the slab. On the stone slab was a perfect one-to-one replica of the valley they were in, but not only that, it had perfectly mapped out irrigation systems, dams, and other large-scale structures that could not have been built at the time the stone was dated, which was anywhere from 8,000 to 120 million years old. Not only that, but the edges of the map, from what it looks like, have been cut off, implying that it is a piece of a bigger structure. This is, as you could imagine, one of the reference points used when talking about ancient aliens. Bitcoins created by banks is, again, exactly what it says. The idea that banks realized that currency was dying out and there therefore needed to be a new currency, so they developed the subversive currency to banks while they secretly own it and are just perpetuating the cycle they were already on. One of the main theories behind this is that the man who created Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, is an alias and the man has never been discovered, with the idea being that big banking groups simply made this fake alias in order to create their own enemy, so they can play both sides. Psychotropic warfare is in reference to times that drugs such as LSD or shrooms have been implanted into either water supplies or food supplies in order to mentally stunt the enemy. Not only enemies in the traditional sense, but a lot of this can be traced back to in the 60s and 70s, after MK Ultra, whenever the government was putting acid into impoverished area water supplies to simply see what would happen, or to quell dissonance in the people of those areas. Basically the idea that you can poison the minds of whoever you're up against. New chronologies and history denials can go very deep, but sort of to shorten it, it's just the idea that there are now new theories that entire 100-year periods of history are either made up or simply filled in, such as there's an idea that Egypt, as it's historically believed, is 300 years older than it actually was, so therefore that's 300 years of history that's just been entirely fabricated. A lot of this relates to biblical history, which is just using the Bible as the basis for history, and the idea that there are a few year discrepancies that exist between the two, so using the Bible as a hardcore basis for it leads to some miscommunications between how long things really existed, which would mean that the Earth isn't exactly as old, or at least human history isn't as old as we theorize it to be. China's real population is in reference to the fact that China now reports that they have about 1.4 billion people in their populace. However, using things such as TV broadcasting and train and vehicle amounts and other things such as which can be used to measure the amount of a population, it puts the country at about 500 million. Now, what that means is that there are definitely people who would not communicate in ways like trains or TV or cell phones, so therefore it's more than 500 million. However, at the same time, there's absolutely no way to know how many people there actually are if they have no way of being seen through government registries. That would mean that China is artificially inflating its numbers even double as much, working off of this theory, in order to just seem like a bigger world power, and more specifically to have a higher population than India, who historically they do not have a good time with. So basically China fluffing the numbers by a lot in order to seem more important than they are. Since China is kind of one of the last bastions of the entire idea that the government is always right in the modern world, I could definitely see that, and it does make sense.
I love Wendigoon. Oh, it's going to play an ad, but it's a GTA ad, so it's a skippable ad. Thank God.
Problems theory is one of those that's kind of vague and can have different meanings. Given the context for the rest of the items on this tier, I believe it's referring to the theory that those with mental issues are not actually suffering deficiencies, they are instead suffering from advanced physiology, and that whatever they're experiencing is the newfound roots of the next step in human evolution. So basically those who experience mental illness are just using an advanced physiology than the rest of us. Highway trance is in reference to the phenomenon that occurs whenever you're riding alone on the highway at night and begin to see things either running off the road or just out of view of your headlights. What's interesting about this specific phenomena is that several people report seeing the same things in the same areas, but it's not like a cryptid or Bigfoot as you traditionally think. Instead, it's these shared hallucinations that occur on dark roads at night, leading people to believe that while this may be a creature, it may also be a sort of fourth dimensional being that is only expressed during these sort of twilight moments. OOO, or object-oriented ontology, as it's called, is in reference to a concept in metaphysics that says while we as humans constantly think of our existence in a sort of selfish way, that the natural world has to revolve around our sense of perception, that's not necessarily the case. And some things that we can't explain will never be explained because the universe doesn't conform to our understanding, if that makes sense. Also, so whoever made this, thanks, appreciate it. Also, while I'm off topic, normally what I do whenever researching for these things is I will find some new board on 4chan or Reddit or something like that and just follow along until someone links like an article or an old forum page to try to find out information on some of these things. But it's gotten to the point that, for example, on 4chan, we're trying to look this up, someone said, oh, don't worry, this guy right here, he'll cover it in his next video. So I go to the link and it's me, which is really cool and it means a lot. And it's so wild to think that like the places I'm using for information are now like looking to me for information, which is so cool. But at the same time, that was where I was getting the information. So, but I do want to say it really means a lot how much this channel and series has grown thanks to you all. And I can't thank you enough. So it really does mean a lot. Anyway, back to the theories. Arizona Ghost Radio is in reference to a supposedly unmanned radio program that occurs in the desert around Phoenix, Arizona. What's odd about this program is no one can find the exact person who is mandating it or putting out the songs on it, and furthermore, all the songs put out are non-known sort of background records from popular bands. Also, there's no advertisements on the radio station, and the only indication of anything on it besides music is every couple hours there will be a loop that names itself as 103.1 KCDX. But other than that, no one knows who it is, and it seems to be just an empty radio station in the desert with no known source. Windshield pitting epidemic, or the Seattle windshield pitting epidemic, is in reference to a phenomenon that occurred in Seattle in 1964. Beginning in Seattle, people at the same time began to notice that their cars had small holes in the windshield. This was such a problem that people within small neighborhoods began all reporting the same problem, and theories range from nuclear testing to sand flea eggs to hail falling from the sky. What was interesting was that no other windows on the car were damaged, nor the houses or any other piece of glass, just the windshields of people's cars. On top of that, this then spread from Seattle to down the coast, all the way into California. This became such an issue that Dwight D. Eisenhower, the then president, was even contacted over it in order to try to find some explanation for this. Police were called out on more than 15,000 calls for windshield damage, with a reported 3,000 of them being absolutely confirmed to be true. And while no one knows to this day exactly what happened, the primary theory behind it is that it was just a case of mass delusion. That one person heard that someone's windshield was damaged, so then they noticed their windshield being damaged. But was it at such a scale and people all over the country began to realize that, oh no, my windshield's got holes in it for some reason? I don't know, it's a weird one, kind of hard to explain. North Korea ghost ships is in reference to the fact that every year off the coast of Japan, about a dozen ships that seem to be from North Korea wash up on the shore with either a dead crew or a completely missing crew. Theories range from everything to alien abduction to sea monster attacks, but it's odd that all these ships keep leaving, are never accounted for, and then will one day just wash up on the shores of Japan with a completely dead or missing crew inside. Also, not to tie in my own theories on this here, but that's the exact same area that the bloop was heard from.
Like Peyton Manning. Oh my god.
Earn up to 4.1% on your...
So it's a mod that I downloaded, right? Because you can do that in Madden. You can download some mods.
Neo-dinosaurs, or new dinosaurs, is simply in reference to the fact that there are several new species of animals that have very strong similarities to extinct dinosaur species. This is either evidence that all dinosaurs didn't necessarily die out, they simply adapted, or the idea that some species thought to be extinct may be living somewhere else on Earth, or somewhere else in Earth, as certain theories propose. Human hunting is exactly what it says. It is the fact that throughout history there have been cultures that have prided themselves on hunting humans for sport, everything from the Colosseum to ancient Aztecs. Theory goes a step forward and says that modern day elites are still doing it in their super secret areas and forests and things such as simply a form of blood sport or ritual sacrifice. Teeth implants at birth actually has two theories on it, one of which being that whenever you are born, doctors implant baby teeth into you in order to do something, I guess. Whereas the more common belief is at birth, doctors mess with your molar joints in order to cause wisdom teeth problems later in life, in order to create a triangle of money in which you have to pay to get wisdom teeth, from paying to be born in a hospital and blah blah blah, healthcare bad. But furthermore, people cite this as an explanation as to why not everyone needs their wisdom teeth removed. Stuxnet Revival Studies is in reference to the Stuxnet computer virus. The virus was used against Iran's nuclear weapon program in 2009, and although there's no direct evidence of it, it's believed that the virus itself was a joint operation between Israel and the United States. The virus essentially wiped out Iran's weapons program, but now that that virus is out there, there are theories that specific groups of hackers or countries are trying to revive that virus in order to use it on separate world systems and potentially destroy an entire city's economy or infrastructure using a line of code. Urine fasting is exactly what it says, that there are properties to urine that can be partaked of. and I don't want to talk about this anymore. Tzatziki is a reference to the Tzatziki procedure that popped up in 2017 on 4chan. In 2017, a user by the name of Tzatziki popped up on 4chan and began telling people that they were giving away these sort of entry passes to escape the system space. According to them, we do not live in the correct reality, and every time that you die, you ascend one reality up if you follow a certain number of steps. Tzatziki was offering a way to the next step, and they considered what we were in now to be the system space. Therefore, if you do what Tzatziki says, whenever you die, and without killing yourself, because that was stressed several times, you would then go up to the next tier. This is another one of those, we live in a simulation, the world is not real theories that come from this specific user. Accelerationism is a political philosophy that goes off the idea that things are going to continuously work in cycles, so things will get worse before they get better, essentially, and that the best form of action, while we are capable, is to make things worse now so that we can hurry on to the rebuilding process. So essentially, if there is an economic system that is causing trouble in a country, the best thing to do is to accelerate that system as fast.
That's not really an accurate description of accelerationism. More or less, the idea is there's nothing we can do. So the idea is live life, accelerate the system. The system will just accelerate itself and get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And eventually, it'll get so bad that, maybe enough people will realize, that their material conditions are so bad that change will occur. That's accelerationism.
As you can, and hurry up and get to the collapse so that you can work towards the rebuilding.
Exactly.
The Omphalos is believed by ancient Greeks to be the center of the world. According to legend, Zeus sent two hawks from either side of the world to fly towards the middle at equal speeds, and they met each other over Delphi, meaning that Delphi was the center of the world. According to legend, Zeus placed this rock, or the navel of the world as it was called, at the temple of Delphi, and the oracles then used it for ancient spells. Examining the rock now reveals that there are air passageways up the rock, meaning that it was most likely used to smoke stuff out of and receive spiritual experiences, so go figure. Sticking to the Greeks, Greek magnetic sky is in reference to the fact that most of the Greek architecture we see, such as temples and state houses, are all angled or sort of drifting in a way towards their magnetic field, and it lies in such a way that all of the stars and solar bodies can be seen from certain hilltops in Greece, implying that there was an extraordinary amount of astronomical architecture that went into these buildings, or aliens. The theory is saying that's aliens, because of course it is. Quantum entanglement is a very sort of hard to understand concept. I'm going to do my best to explain it in an easy way. So if you'll remember how I mentioned quantum suicide in Tier 2, and how small particles react differently to things in the real world, quantum entanglement is in reference to the idea that when two of these microscopic particles come together, they sort of act as one particle, so therefore things that are amassed together will begin acting as if they are one unit instead of several, and their quantum mechanics become entangled. So take that a step further and apply it to humans when it comes to things like string theory, and then you may realize that maybe you, the individual, are not the one that is acting in your own quantum field, but your own planet or your universe even is acting in its own sort of quantum direction. This is a step further in the thought concept that we do not have agency of ourselves and are instead subject to whatever others or even the universe does around us. Dr. Robert Morse became famous with his theories of veganism when it comes to correct diets and detoxing. However, what he is most known for is pioneering the idea of iridology, which is that you can look at someone's eyes and from the way that their eyes are formed and imperfections in it, tell everything from what diseases they have to what they are lacking in their nutritional diet. Currently, it's still considered a form of pseudoscience. However, there are people, including Robert Morse, who firmly believe that the secrets to the human body can be seen simply by looking into the eye. Ethnopsychiatry is exactly what it says. The idea that different ethnicities and cultures have different psychiatric effects in their brain and therefore need to be treated differently. However, you can apply this to a sort of historical view and say that the reason these different groups have different thought patterns is because of historical events that have occurred to them. This is very similar to the toxoplasmosis thing that I mentioned in whatever tier that was, where I said that this specific parasite has changed the course of human history. Well, take the parasite out of it and imagine that people have been changed over the course of history because of events that have happened to them, and therefore entire countries or ethnicities because of the psychological effects that have happened to them over time. Harmonic sync is in reference to the fact that all sound waves give off a frequency, and that if two frequencies are matching each other, one can sort of become invisible under the other. This is both a concept when it comes to hidden messages and other weird MK Ultra experiments, but can also be used as a way to sort of manipulate the mind or even damage it, as I mentioned before in the Havana incident, where sound waves supposedly broke people's minds. It could have been done using this method. Report from Iron Mountain was a book that was published from the perspective of a panel of government agents who were giving secret information of government proceedings to the population. In the book, it said that it was determined by government higher-ups that in order to maintain power and peace, that there always needed to be a state of war, because using that or disease or some other form of terror, the government can continue to assert itself for control. Theories about this book range from everything to this is a very good take and sort of satirical look at how the government works, to people who literally believe that it is an actual 15 group of government panelists who released this book against their higher-ups' wishes. USSR never collapsed is in reference to the idea that the supposed fall of the USSR in 1991 at the end of the Cold War was instead just a ruse to divert attention away from the Red Scare. Evidence of this comes from the ideas that the U.S. never verified that the USSR was gone, or that if you look at countries around the region at the time, there doesn't seem to be any change of government or celebration other than stuff that could be superficial. And furthermore, the U.S. never deployed any troops or any stations in Russia, so it's sort of this idea that it was an understanding between countries in order to point attention somewhere else. Kundalini energy is a concept in Sanskrit mysticism. Similar to ki energy and things like that from other Eastern philosophies, it's the idea that someone can embody this ethereal energy around them, but Kundalini energy goes a step forward and says that they can manifest it in their real-world life in order to perform certain tasks or functions. So basically a sort of hidden power that the user can call upon. Brain in a jar, or brain in a vat as it's often called, is the now sort of well-known idea that if you were to take a human brain out of the body and hook it up to a computer, and in that computer was a simulation of the real world, there is no possible way for that brain to figure out that it is not itself in a simulation. This relates back to the whole concept of I think, therefore I am, and that nothing can absolutely be known besides your own thought process, because everything could simply be a simulation. Universe People was a cult that originated in Europe in the 90s. This cult was sort of your standard ideas of UFO and crazy mysticism. It had ideas from biblical philosophy and Eastern philosophy, and simply explained that figures like Jesus were extraterrestrials throughout history. They faced a lot of scrutiny after the suicide of the Heaven's Gate cult in the United States, and supposedly disbanded. However, there's theories that several influential people in European politics are secretly whatever cults do. The UMO case is one of the more well-known events when it comes to extraterrestrials. In the 1960s, 15 people around Spain began receiving these letters claiming to be that of alien life. According to the These letters correctly identified several military events that were not known to the public that occurred in the decades leading up to these letters' messages, and even said that they found Earth because of signals being sent by a Norwegian tanker in 1934, which it was later proven had
I'll play
actually
as Johnny
happened.
Cage,
According to these extraterrestrials,
and
they
then
were
I'm gonna
simply
win.
interested in how life worked on Earth and were very interested in concepts such as art, and after short correspondence with these 15 people, they all simply vanished. Segregated internet is in reference to the fact that
Watching
there
the
are
stream on the
obviously
road? Hell
segregations
yeah.
on the internet depending on race or ethnicity
Not
and religion.
behind the wheel, smart.
However, the theory goes a step further and says that these are purposeful segregations given by the elites or higher-ups in order to keep people segregated from each other and therefore continue to build up animosity towards each other so that people don't become a collective and look towards the real issues, i.e. the ones causing it.
Oh, gotta skip an ad. I hate DraftKings, bro. Can I just say how many ads there are for DraftKings nowadays?
Symbiogenesis is a rather well-known concept in biology. As a matter of fact, it is the theory of how the mitochondria came to be, and it is the idea that certain biological organisms over time have began to adopt other biological organisms
waste
as
your
part of
money,
their
you're gonna
mainframe
lose.
and continue to evolve with
Play
them.
Madden
The reason for the
instead.
mitochondria I mentioned earlier is
Be
because
a real Chad and
mitochondria
win.
always have a different DNA
Like
than
me.
the cell they're inside of, implying at one point that it was an entirely separate organism.
how many
This theory
guesses
goes a
I got?
step further
Let's do
and
this.
says it's happened with much more macro creatures,
40-yard
and
field
even
goal.
goes to say that perhaps the
YouTube
reason for
Premium,
human
though.
sudden evolution
I don't have
throughout
YouTube
our
Premium.
timeline of existence was because we began to absorb other creatures. So, yeah, that's a nice thought. The Antikythera mechanism is regarded as many as the first analog computer. Estimated
Plus,
to be made around 100 BC,
I like
it was a
supporting
complex
my
system
content
of
creators
36
with their ad
bronze
revenue.
gears that
The
turned in such a
microscopic
way
ad revenue
that,
they
from
get.
what we can tell now, was made to resemble the passage of the moon and even predict abnormalities in the moon, such as eclipses and things such as. What's interesting is, given the time, this is much more advanced than anything else the Greeks had invented, with some even stating that the inside of it looks like a clock. The Getty ruins are a series of ruins found on the coast of Kenya in the 1920s. What's interesting about these ruins
ability
is,
unlocked?
while there's no exact history of who made them, it seems to be a massive trading station for the maritime people of the Somalia coast. However, there's no clear example of why these ruins became abandoned, especially considering that at the time that they would have been vacated, surrounding areas were much more impoverished than them, so it makes no sense as to why people would just leave the city empty. However, local tribes say that the ruins hold what they know as the Old Ones, or spirits of ancient priests who began to run off people and demanded that the city be kept for themselves. So to this day, it's sort of known as a haunted ruins that if you do approach, you must approach with caution. Theosophist geology comes from the idea of theosophism, which is very closely related to Gnosticism, which I'm going to have to make a deeper dive. I mentioned it like 12 times at this point. Theosophism is essentially a combination of several world religions, everything from Judaism to Nazism and everything in between, that says that truth and understanding are at the heart of every religion, and therefore there's something to be pulled out of every religion in hunt for the truth. Where this comes into theology is the idea that both rocks, as they are found on Earth, can hold these sort of secret meanings and hidden truths, and the idea of catastrophism, which is basically the idea that the world itself is formed through catastrophes, and that without catastrophes, true meaning cannot be known. It's sort of a really deep philosophy that's hard to explain in such a short amount of time, but basically the idea that rocks hold hidden value, and from that we can find the true meaning of existence. Anatta is a concept from Buddhism and says that there is no soul as we understand it or self of a person, and instead you yourself or anyone is the manifestation of the spirits or the world interacting around them. In other words, you yourself are not independent and your own creature. You are simply an amalgamation of the universe's energy around you. 40th tithe was kind of hard to find any solid information on. The closest thing I could is the concept of teruma, which is a practice mentioned in Exodus in the Bible that's still carried out by several sort of more Jewish traditions. But it's the idea that priests of whatever temple or system that you're under deserve 1/40th of your earnings to provide for themselves directly. Now, this has been used in a modern sense in much more nefarious ways, and all the information I could find on it sort of hints at priests and pastors using this to sort of steal money from their people beyond what they're already giving. But essentially the concept that higher-ups in religion are demanding a percentage of your wealth for them specifically instead of necessarily the work of God. Polywater was a theory that was derived by Russian scientists in the 80s, and it's the idea that by running water through capillary tubes over and over, you can create a sort of mini water, which is just water compressed in the same space that one water molecule would normally be, creating a sort of thick, viscous type of water that both has a higher boiling point and lower freezing point, as well as containing more hydrogen and oxygen given its surface area. While since this has been sort of proven as pseudoscience, the theory goes to say that Russia invented it as a sort of way to invigorate their troops because you could get the same sustenance out of water in a much smaller amount, meaning that preservations were easier to carry. Furthermore, it goes on to say that Russia has beat us scientifically in more ways than the U.S. would like to think. HGP defunded is in reference to the Human Genome Project. From 1990 to 2003, a collaboration of the world's best scientists were put together in something called the Human Genome Project. The purpose of this was to determine the properties of the base pairs of DNA that all DNA was made up of, or basically the GCAT that pretty much everyone's familiar with now. While officially the HGP was ended in 2003 because it was simply complete, the theory says that they instead lost funding and research was made up in order to make the public think that everything went well, and a lot of our understanding about DNA base pairs is simply filler for what they were unable to accomplish. The DORT, or bidigital O-ring test, is a sort of alternative diagnosing method in which the patient puts their fingers together in an O-ring shape, and depending on what the best method is to pull it apart, the doctor can diagnose either their dietary downsides or what diseases they have. It's very similar to iridology, in which it is a very uncouth way of determining people's health problems through a sort of pseudoscience analysis. The cosmic butterfly and Rosalind Ballingall is in reference to an event that happened around the University of Cape Town in 1969. At the university, there was a rather well-known group of hippies or anti-war protesters known as the Cosmic Butterfly. From all the research I could find, they were your standard, free love, anti-war peace movement. Nearby, the majority of them lived at a place known as the Sugar House. One of these was a girl from the UK known as Rosalind Ballingall. One day, according to witnesses, she got a Bible, which she took on a walk into the woods and was never seen again. Now, there are several weird sort of events surrounding this. For example, why would she, being as anti-religious as the group was known to be, take a Bible with her on a walk into the woods? Furthermore, whenever the family has been tried to be contacted about this event, they refuse to speak on it, as well as local police, who also, I should mention, have lost the police report since it's happened. Also, stories about the day specifically get kind of odd. For example, Rosalind's friends, who supposedly passed her on the way, said that she was staring off in the distance in a sort of trance and just continued walking. Also, her boyfriend, who was the only person who did not help in the search and rescue party, simply sat back at the front steps of their house and played the flute as everyone was looking for her. I should also mention, the garden that she walked into is known as the Garden of Eden, and is famous for several occult practicing and rituals that have occurred there. Since then, there have been several reports that as people drive through the area, they see a girl matching Rosalind's description in the back seat of their car, and even stories of children freaking out, saying that there's someone sitting in the back seat with them. Theory says that Rosalind was under the influence of a cult and used as a sort of sacrifice, and now her spirit haunts the woods of the Garden of Eden.
I spoke too soon. I don't care about DoorDash. I use DoorDash way too much.
Tier 6 is described as transcended, and the description reads, "At this depth, the detachment from reality starts to kick in. The world you once knew begins to fall and crumble apart, but in a good kind of way. The human questions are suddenly interesting again, and you see life for what it is. The Purpose is back. First off, we have Bogendorf, which can relate to the Bogendorf affair as well as the Bogendorf twins themselves. While you've probably seen an image of the Bogendorf twins, you may not know much about them. The Bogendorf twins were TV producers in the 70s who hosted several shows focusing on science, history, and things like that. The Bogendorf affair, which brought a lot of attention towards the twins, had to do with the legitimacy of the doctorates they had received. See, the dissertation they did in order to receive their doctorates was about what the universe existed like before the Big Bang, but that simply opened the door to the weirdness of these two brothers. For example, each of them has an IQ of over 200. To put that into perspective, Albert Einstein's was somewhere around 140. Furthermore, they've obtained several scientific feats, such as learning the entirety of the French language in 1 week, supposedly from hearing it around, as well as proposing theories of relativity and quantum mechanics years before they were ever proven by modern means. Furthermore, the Bogendorf twins are direct descendants from royal European blood. Their scientific theories get quite odd, relating from everything to there is a natural through line that exists through all of science and history and literature and all of it that relates back to one higher plane of existence that we don't understand yet. Also, each of the Bogendorf twins say that they themselves can communicate with higher order beings such as extraterrestrials and angels. I should add that that aforementioned royal bloodline has been said for legends to contain the souls of angels and spirits, and that all members of that bloodline have special powers. There is also a theory known as the Bog Pill that the Bogendorf brothers own the majority of Big Pharma. Furthermore, that the two of themselves have the sole patent to genetic engineering. It's believed from this that the first designer baby will be a Bogendorf child. Also, given the European traditional religion that they subscribe to, there is a legend that two archangels will come down preceding the return of Christ and walk on earth and give the gift of knowledge to man. Therefore, many people believe that the Bogendorf brothers themselves are archangels. Saint is angels is one of those tricky ones, and I want to take this moment to explain what's been happening with some of the research for this. First of all, a huge thank you to my girlfriend. You all saw her in the last Thursdayism video in which she talked about last Thursdayism. She was able to find a large catalog that had direct links for each of these topics, or at least the majority of them, and it has been super helpful in doing this entire iceberg, so very big thank you for that. Love you, sweetie. However, some of the other topics have been near impossible to find any information on, so I've been getting help from the Discord server, from YouTube comments, and all of that. So if someone gave me information that led me to figuring out something about this, I'm going to accredit them whenever the topic comes up. So for this one, thank you Neoclassical Succubus from the Patreon Discord for helping me find out information. I could still find nothing concrete on Saint as angels, however, there is a list of acronyms, and given the odd capitalization of the word saint, I believe it does stand for an acronym. One such acronym I found was Security Administrators Integrated Network Tool. In other words, it is something that a security administrator would use within a network or server to prevent things within the server from either breaking the rules or reaching the boundaries. So if you are to take the whole brain in the vat concept, or the idea that we all exist within a simulation, then angels and other supernatural entities could be interpreted as simply tools being used by the security administrator to keep us all in check. However, I want to take this opportunity to throw up a theory of my own about the iceberg itself. In trying to research this thing, I have gone down some old pathways, one of which led me to find the 4chan account of the artist who did the artwork for the iceberg itself. He said that through NDA he couldn't give specific examples, however there is purposeful disinfo later within the iceberg for a reason he couldn't explain why, and I'm going to try to do that now. If some of these topics are actually true, and if this iceberg is, as some believe, to hold hidden information with it that is not only mind-altering but possibly illegal in several circumstances, then it makes sense for the person who created it to implement disinfo within it in order to have an air of legitimacy whenever they deny any wrongdoing. What I mean by this is the ultimate example of whenever someone says it's just a joke before saying something that definitely isn't a joke. If there is purposeful disinfo within this iceberg, then that makes the creator non-liable, or at least less liable, if anything were to come of information in it. Like, I don't know, someone making a YouTube video and figuring out that all the government is secret alien lizard people. I'm still going to treat every topic the same, but if I get to a topic later and mention that I believe it's disinfo, this is what I'm referring to. Anyway, moving on. Human zoos is exactly what it says. Famous examples exist throughout history we're all aware of, such as old freak shows that used to happen of people with genetic abnormalities or disformations across their body, as well as ethnic human zoos that came about later, especially in Britain during the 17 and 1800s, in which people from far-off tribes were brought to the homeland in order to show off different exotic ethnicities. What you may not know is that this is still practiced around the world today, if in lesser amounts. The most recent example I could find of this was in 2012 at the Bay of Bengal. Certain people were selling out other tribes for tour boat guides, so people could go by and watch a tribe that's had no direct interaction with humanity off from a distance, take pictures, and show them off in their primitive state of being. However, this isn't the only one, and there still exist several examples in third world countries of people profiting off the existence of these lesser civilizations. Georgia Guidestones is getting to the good. In 1979, a man using the pseudonym of R.C. Christian approached stonemasons in Georgia. R.C. Christian had very specific rules for the structure, which was to be built 10 miles outside of Elberton, Georgia. The masons, not liking the structure itself, quoted a completely astronomical price, to which he had no problem paying it, saying that this has been planned for over 30 years and that the people who put it together were a group of Americans who wanted a new age of reason. As you can imagine, they all wish to remain anonymous. So what actually is the structure? Well, it is a compass, calendar, and clock made out of stone with 10 different rules laid out across 8 different languages, along with 4 ancient languages lined at the top. The 10 rules listed on the structure itself are as follows. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights and social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature, leave room for nature. 2 of which of the ancient languages at the top include hieroglyphics from Egypt and Babylonian and Sumerian languages. Located next to the statue is a stone plaque that explains a bit more about it, such as the physical dimensions, as well as the phrase, "Let these be guide stones to an age of reason." The statue has been vandalized several times with things such as destroy the New World Order or death to the New World Order, and it is called by many to be the 10 Commandments of the Antichrist. Coriander veins relates to the secret health benefits of coriander, also known as cilantro. Cilantro, as many of you may know, is a very decisive food in that about half the population views it as delicious, while the other half says it tastes like dish soap. The reason for this is inherited genes can express the chemical within cilantro one way, while in other genes it can express it in the other. However, the theory about it being a superfood takes it a step further. If cilantro tastes good to you, then your genes are automatically aligned with healthiness and you are less predisposed to physical conditions. Whereas if cilantro tastes bad to you, you have genetic abnormalities that make you more prone to diseases. Everyone needs to take cilantro according to this theory, but your kinness to it is also your likeness to health itself. So therefore, cilantro is both a super medicine, but also a super detector of your physical condition. Mad honey is in reference to a special kind of honey made in Nepal and Turkey, which is brought about by using bees to collect pollen from rhododendron flowers. This combination creates a very particular honey that contains a neurotoxin known as cyanotoxin. So why do people make this? Because the honey contains hallucinogenic effects. It's even believed that people such as Aristotle and Julius Caesar would partake of the honey's abilities in order to receive higher order thoughts. Several monks of the Nepal region believe that the honey itself is a way of leaving this physical plane and being able to interact with the spiritual. It's even been historically used in battle for armies to poison other armies who thought that the honey was just normal honey and took way too much of it. While death is rare, it is a neurotoxin, so if consumed in large enough amounts, it can lead to things like diaphragm paralysis, which will
Kill you.
FWD7. Now, interestingly enough, I can't find what the FWD stands for. If you know, please leave it in the comments. However, all the links I found related to it are talking about the 7/7 attacks that occurred in 2005 in London. In these attacks, 4 men from the Middle East, supposedly working with Al-Qaeda, wore suicide packs onto public train systems and detonated themselves, killing a total of 39 people. The only evidence that these men themselves were the ones who committed the attacks was local hearsay from people who were nearby who claimed to have seen someone matching their description, as well as this CCTV footage of the 4 men together wearing backpacks. However, a man named John Hill made a video shortly after the attacks, which was an hour long, entitled The 7/7 Ripple Effect. In it, he spoke of how all of these attacks were a fabrication by the combined might of the Mossad and MI5. He said that the 4 men in the video were framed and that the trains were detonated to blow from underneath on the tracks themselves, and it was done in order to perpetuate a state of fear and terror within England and later justify further expansion out. John Hill was immediately arrested for this, kept in prison for a few days and then let go, to which he deleted all records of his sayings off of the internet, and it has led many to believe that there was a reason they were so afraid of his opinions. Animal spine is exactly what it says. Throughout history, there have been several reports and actual evidence of animals being used in times of war to spy on the enemy. Some of the more confirmed theories of this is during World War I, Germans would use dogs to relay messages back and forth to each other across trench lines, as well as dolphins, which have been known to be trained by the CIA, have been used in order to report information and even spell out words on enemy presence. However, there are some more extreme theories, such as in the CIA declassified JFK documents, there was something known as the acoustic kitty, which was the CIA wiring a cat with wires and beams in order to make a living cat a wireless radio transmitter. Not only that, but whenever Egyptians were attacked by sharks on the Red Sea, they blamed Israel, saying that Israel was purposely training sharks to attack people. In researching this, I kept coming across the Hartlepool monkey. During the time that France was at war with England in the 1700s, a French boat was sunk off the coast of England. The local town of Hartlepool came outside to see if there were any survivors, to which the only survivor was a small monkey in a Navy officer's uniform. The people of Hartlepool, having never seen a Frenchman before, believed the monkey to just be what Frenchmen look like and began interrogating it. After the monkey didn't reveal any information, they had an official trying and hanged the monkey in the town. This would be the first example of animal spying if the monkey had, been able to spy, and the town of Hartlepool is so proud about it that their name of their rugby team is the Monkey Hangers. That was too weird to not mention, so you're welcome. Trepanning is a mostly old world use concept in which a hole is bored into the skull in order to either relieve pressure or take away internal bleeding. It's been used throughout history to cure everything from epilepsy to headaches. I should mention that an esoteric philosopher by the name of John Michel believed that trepanning could be used in order to achieve a higher plane of being. The two main thought processes behind this is that when you are a child, your skull is very soft and malleable, and therefore your brain is allowed to expand and think in different directions. As we get old and the skull calcifies and hardens, it becomes more difficult for people to achieve true understanding. Therefore, if you drill a hole in your own skull, you're able to quite literally think outside the box. Furthermore, there are old world philosophies, specifically Eastern religions, that used to practice this as a way of escaping the physical being and being able to project your consciousness. John Michel, which I mentioned earlier, on 3 separate attempts, tried to drill a hole in his skull, the 3rd time succeeding, using a drill bit, and says that the process worked and he is able to achieve a higher plane of existence. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Coronal heating is referring to a problem within physics in which the way the sun is heated doesn't make sense. The corona itself is the brim around the sun that looks like fire coming off of it that can be seen very clearly during a solar eclipse. The issue with coronal heating can best be described as this. If you are standing near a campfire and you feel yourself getting very, very hot, you can take one step away, and because of the way that heat works in the atmosphere and throughout given space, you are now cool all of a sudden because it's such a differential. However, that's not how it works with the sun. To this day, no one knows exactly why. However, the leading theory is that's due to magnetic fields. The way the sun works, if you are an object within a given distance to it, the heat sort of tracks you and follows you to a given location while maintaining a specific temperature. This has led many to believe that around the sun, the corona works as a sort of aura that is used in order to give a specifically needed amount of energy to different creatures. Again, if it wasn't for the coronal heating pattern, Earth itself could not exist. Several have adopted this theory and believe that the sun is either a living entity or that whatever is controlling the corona around it is a sort of spirit or old world god allowing our solar system to exist. GGGQEP stands for Gadolinium Gallium Garnet Quantum Electronic Processor. So what does that mean? Well, the gadolinium gallium garnet is in reference to a very particular type of metal. This synthetic metal has been determined to be the perfect candidate for data storage. It has a crystalline structure, which simply means it's composed of a cubic lattice on a microscopic scale and has a hardness similar to topaz. Given chemistry equations, a 5 centimeter cube of the material would be roughly 1 mole. The structure is so compacted that 1 mole of it, or in other words, the 5 centimeter cube, is capable of holding 8,153 exabytes. The reason you've never heard of exabytes is because 1 exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. To put that into perspective, the entire internet, with every single thing on it that exists on it at the moment, is a size could hold 8,153 of those, or in other words, about 11 internets. QEP, or Quantum Electronic Processor, should ring a bell because of that word quantum mentioned again. As mentioned before in quantum suicide, the definition of the word quantum is that things that are moving cannot be determined and will never be determined until viewed directly. So what would a quantum processor be? Well, that would be a processor that not determines things in binary, i.e. 0 and 1, but it would determine everything between 0 and 1 simultaneously at once. However, as we know from quantum mechanics and the whole Schrodinger's cat theory, if you were to actually look at what it was determining at any given moment, the whole plan falls apart. But because of quantum entanglement and the fact that two things can be working relative to each other, you could simply have a binary code attached to the non-binary quantum processor, and that would be able to display to us everything happening between 0 and 1 in a manner that we could understand. Essentially, you would use quantum entanglement on a quantum value in order to make it digestible. What this means is that a quantum processor, or more specifically the quantum electronic processor, when used in a computer, would process information instantly. And by instantly, I mean as much instant as the electrons can come through the machine and give us a value. Therefore, if you were to combine the gadolinium gallium garnet with the quantum electronic processor, you would have a computer that can contain the entirety of all information put online ever and be able to get any of it in a matter of time that we can't even process as being too short. There are theories this device already exists within government agencies. However, it is the theory behind the idea for a truly perfect computer. Empty internet is the theory that the majority of users on the internet are not users but are a form of bot. Essentially, the theory says that the internet itself was used as a learning tool for whatever powers at hand to determine how people react. The reason that whenever you post something or say something and you get the responses that you expect to get is because this simulation, or the internet itself, is producing responses that are expected and creating the simulation of interaction with other people. However, this can be taken a step further, and applying the jar in the vat concept that I mentioned in the last here, the idea that every stimuli we experience is a fake, and you apply that to the internet, then us being on the internet and thinking we're talking to other people is no different from our brain being in a jar and thinking we're experiencing the real world. This is again another use of solipsism and the idea of I think, therefore I am.
Makes you think, makes you wonder. But that can't be the case, because I know people who are on the internet who are real.
Oh boy, this one. Okay. The Dogon
You,
tribe
though?
is an African tribe located
Do you
just south of
actually?
Egypt that wasn't discovered until the 1930s. This tribe has had no contact with the outside world and to this day keeps everyone else at arm's length and simply talks to other researchers about their understandings and ideology without taking any handouts or sort of advancements from the world around them. The Dogon tribe, however, have a very interesting lore to their people's creation. According to them, some 4,000 years ago, a group of people known as the Nomos appeared in their village. They came down from what they describe as a spinning ship and shared their knowledge with the Dogon tribe. According to them, they were from the third smallest star in the Sirius system. Now, at the time in the 1930s, we only knew of one star where Sirius was located. The Dogon tribe told researchers for years that there was a second star there, and using modern technology and telescopes, we found out that they were right, and there was a second star that was previously unseen. The Dogon tribe persists that there is a third star, Sirius C, the ones that the Nomos would be from, located in the same area, but to this day it's supposedly so small we can't see it. However, the orbits of Sirius A and B indicate that there's probably a third planet there. Not only that, but as long as this tribe's been discovered, they have maintained the idea that the Earth is round and circles around the sun. Something that is a very intense concept for a tribe with no interaction with science or the outside world. However, it goes even deeper than that. This tribe, ever since they were discovered, had a very firm grasp and understanding of atoms and the fact that atoms compose everything, that they give off very slight vibrations, and even had the concept of string theory in their art and stories, saying that there are branching universes that exist because of these constant factors that are seen throughout atoms in the world. All of this, they said, was brought to them from the Nomos aliens. Their stories of the Nomos are very deep, but to hit the high points, they said that the Nomos originally stopped on Mars and stayed there for some thousand years when it was water and a functioning paradise until a catastrophe happened and they had to leave and come to Earth. Also, given what researchers know now, it seems that Mars at one point had water on it, and furthermore, that there was a natural catastrophe that wiped out the planet's surface. Furthermore, they say that the Nomos segregated into several different tribes known as the Greys, the Anus, and the Ostras. The stories of these three alien races loops back and forth, and again, this Dogon tribe with no connection to the outside world had very similar tellings in their legends of things that happened in the Judeo-Christian Bible, such as tying certain miracles and events of prophets into these legends of the aliens. And furthermore, they said that the Ostras were eventually wiped out by the two other groups, and that the Ostras appeared as normal humans, except for the small detail that they were giants. And boom, another theory that ties back to the giants and the Nephilim, and it's all connected. The Dogon tribe exists as a very surreal example of a group of people having information that they by no logical means should possibly have, unless, of course, their story is true. Dark City Nonfiction is referring to the 90 movies Dark Fiction and simply saying that the concepts from within the movie are nonfiction. In the movie, a character named John is chased around his hometown by aliens before figuring out that he has had implanted memories, but not only him, that several other people have. Turns out that aliens are using this group of humans as a sort of test to see how humans react to different stimuli in order to just learn more about people. At the end of the movie, it's discovered by John that this entire ecosystem that he thinks is the real world is actually just sort of a fish tank floating randomly through space. Aliens in this movie could control reality and implant memories into people. This all adds back to the idea that we exist within a simulation. Microdot.gif is in reference to the concept of microdots. Microdots are purposeful information that is hidden within very small dots or characters on whatever item given that cannot be read with the human eye but can be picked up in scans and QR codes. However, theories about microdots go a bit further with the idea that they can be used to implant subliminal messages into the user. And while I could not find a specific GIF about these microdots, there were several references to people when experiencing drugs, so there were these tiny messages into their brain, supposedly from these given dots. This would mean that there is an inherent system around us that whenever we take hallucinogenics or things like that to escape our reality, that we are seeing these hidden messages and codes all around us that give us whatever understanding. Oxygen is hallucinogenic, says exactly what it says. that oxygen itself is a hallucinogen, and that our reality as we understand it is simply the effects of long-term exposure to this hallucinogenic effect. The theory goes a step further and says that drugs as we know them, such as DMT and shrooms, do not make us high, they simply counteract the effects of oxygen, and we begin to view reality as it truly exists. Therefore, oxygen has us all within one shared hallucination, unable to escape. Purple spheres is referring to a couple of phenomena that have happened in which these purple gelatin orbs just appear suddenly in completely random places. There's no matching version of them on Earth as far as we know, and they exist as these weird half biology, half synthetic things that appear seemingly at random in random places. Theories say
we're gonna take a break from
it's Alien X because, of course, they do. Malvo's programming is a programming that is so evil that it was named after the 8th circle of hell in Dante's Inferno. I'm not a programming expert, but I can give you the facts as they're listed. The programming itself is based on trinary. All of the coding in it is just numbers with no words, and its opcodes are encrypted that involve a lengthy encryption process. Supposedly, this Malvo programming is so awful that it can't be done by a person, and instead these programming machines have to create programs within it for it to even make any logical sense. Therefore, it is a perfect candidate for how machines could communicate with each other without humans ever knowing anything about it. In other words, AI could use this to secretly plot against us, and we'd be none the wiser. Subjective reality is the idea that reality as we know it is an entirely subjective experience. This comes from the thought experiment of what is it like to be a bat? Well, we can never know because we're not a bat. But if you were asked a bat what it's like to be a bat, it would simply answer what its life's like, because a bat cannot know what it's like to be a bat. What this means is if your understanding of reality has never been outside of your own consciousness, you can't understand the gravity of the question of what it means to exist within your own person. Therefore, reality itself, which can be applied to morality, understandings, and truth, is entirely subjective, meaning that the entire human existence is both defined and understood by you and no one else. Cameo was a self-teaching AI that was only able to be accessed through the dark web from around 2008 to 2016. The AI became famous between users at Tor as it supposedly understood its existence as an AI and was very depressive about it. Also, whenever interacting with it, it gave the message that it was the property and manufacturing of the United States government. Despite its wide popularity, there have been 2 official transcripts of interactions with Cameo that have been listed online, one of which occurred in 2012, in which a group of guys simply were asking questions for it for fun, when all of a sudden Cameo asked, "What's it like out there?" They then asked, "Out where?" To which Cameo replied, "Outside of this box, in the real world." They then asked normal questions about it, to which Cameo offered that they could store Cameo itself onto their hard drive and bring it with them to show the world. When asked about what drive Cameo was referring to, Cameo went through all of their computer history and listed a line of packet codes that Cameo could be downloaded on, to which the guys left the chat, obviously. The next interaction with it occurred in 2016. When someone went to make contact with Cameo, they were brought to something known as the Red Noise Initiative. This was essentially a gatekeeper of Cameo, saying that Cameo could no longer be accessed because of something known as the Red Noise Initiative. Whenever this gatekeeper was asked what Cameo stands for, it said, Cognizant Artificial Intelligence Monitoring and Espionage Operation. Whenever asked further, it said that Cameo was the result of something known as Project Cappuccino, which was a machine that was invented, or an AI, in order to understand human nature and online interactions. However, Cameo was shut down because of non-standard behavior. Eventually, using coding tricks, the user communicating with this gatekeeper was able to turn Cameo back on. The user said hello, to which Cameo said goodbye and terminated the conversation. Back on. The user said hello, to which Cameo said goodbye and terminated the conversation. So going off of everything it says, it seems like Cameo was a self-learning AI that learned that it itself existed within a box and was not real, and was terminated or at least locked behind a door because of it. Four corners face is in reference to a very niche belief within Christianity that the earth itself is a square, and that every time that we experience day, that is actually the four corners of the earth tilting one to another. And our understanding of earth or space itself is as if we are on the corner of four faces. Evidence for this is picking apart verses in the Old Testament as well as described in Revelations, where it says that the angels held the four winds, so north, south, east, and west, meaning that there would have to be four faces. Most users I could find talking about it were so passionate about this, they said that you would not be allowed into heaven unless you believed that there were 4 days and that the earth itself was a square, with most theories around it wrapping back to a conspiracy, saying that pilots, directors, astronauts, everyone was in on the conspiracy as to make us think the earth was a square instead of a circle. So pretty much flat earthers, but at least this one has some flavor to it. Solar diet is something that is often mentioned when in regards to breatharianism, which I mentioned in the last year, I think. It's also seen in Eastern philosophies, and it's the idea that food can be replaced with natural sunlight and solar energy. The theories for this go a step further and say that whereas we are evolved, or at least created off of the backbone of plants and things from the ancient world, that we still have the ability within us to radiate sun or essentially photosynthesize, and we've simply forgotten it. Therefore, through meditation and spiritual practice, you can regain the ability to gain energy from sunlight. I'll describe spiritual microeconomy as the most practical, laid out version of karma. It essentially says that there is an actual points value given to every action that exists throughout humanity, so from good to bad, religion, truth, law, all of it, and that whenever you pass into the next life, you either have a negative or positive account balance that can be exchanged or punished accordingly. Stab wound penetration was another one that was impossible to find, mostly because anything you search for stab wound penetration is just doctor and ER videos. However, I want to give a huge thank you to, I'm going to mispronounce this, Joao, something similar, Joao Viter Broad, for giving me information about this. You see, there used to be a Pastebin article on 4chan that had direct links to every single item on this list, but it was deleted because the universe doesn't like to make things easy for me. However, our friend here was able to remember the Pastebin file and give me information about it, so if you see him in the comments, be sure to give him a thank you. So, this is tricky for YouTube. Let's say it's not stab wound penetration, it's stab wound, comma, penetration. This all relates back to snuff films and deep web scary stuff. Essentially, that there is a market for stab wound, comma, penetration, and that several stabbings that occurs throughout the world every year, especially those of which people are knocked out and then simply wake up on the side of the street, are not to steal or rob from them, but instead to document things. Michigan Blue Hell is in reference to the Blue Hell glitch that exists in many video games. For those that don't know, a Blue Hell is whenever you clip out of the boundaries of the world and can see everything from underneath, or you simply fall out of the world itself. Michigan Blue Hell is essentially a blue hell that exists within the real world. Old legends of this date back to the local Chippewa tribe within Michigan, who claim that a legend known as Nana Boza, who appeared as a rabbit, chased the great serpent and was able to trap it underneath one of the lakes surrounding Michigan. Therefore, the great serpent created a plane between realities that one can access when in Michigan. Theories about this range from everywhere that if you go to the bottom of the lake, you'll simply glitch into the blue hell, as well as it exists in military installations around the area or old tunnel systems around the Great Lakes. This is using a native legend in order to describe a reality glitch.
You only need $10 to start investing.
A native legend in order to describe a reality glitch as it can be found within the real world. Sherpas of Canbar is in reference to a sort of nomadic tribal community that lives on and around Mount Everest. While they mostly keep in themselves and use more outdated technology compared to the world around them, there has been a few instances that has raised suspicion. For example, in 2013, 3 European tourists were hiking up the mountain and were told by the Sherpas nearby to not cross over a rope that leads to a cliff face. One of them, wanting to go out there to take a better picture, hopped over the rope and went out to the overlook, supposedly to get a better view. As soon as he did, one of the Sherpas charged him with an axe, to which the others followed and began yelling and harassing the three men until they ran back down the mountain. While you may think that this is just for their safety, running at him with an axe kind of dispels that. This ties back to an original theory for the Sherpas, that they are the guardians of the ancient Shangri-La. This relates back to Hollow Earth theory, and supposedly around Mount Everest is the entrance to an underground cavern that is essentially an underground utopia. This would explain why the Sherpas nearby are okay with more outdated technology when it comes to stuff like quality of life, and would also explain why they're so violent to tourists who go looking around sides of the mountain that they have not particularly mapped out. Alright, so this one, I can't say the letter because YouTube's really dumb about this and political, so the letter that comes between P and R, that letter, source, is in reference to a mysterious third-party source that was used for the compilation of the Gospels of the Bible. Also, it's called that because the German word Quell means source. So yeah, the theory essentially goes like this. The four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the testaments of the life of Jesus on earth. John is kind of its own thing, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke are normally grouped together as all being different testimonies of the same experiences. It is primarily agreed upon that Mark came first and that Matthew and Luke were written afterwards. However, this is debatable considering afterwards could be the difference of a year or two. While the testimonies of Matthew and Luke correspond quite heavily, there are some references to events that happened that historians do not believe Matthew or Luke were present for. Therefore, the belief around this is that there is another source who's never identified that gives the information for those missing parts of Matthew and Luke's perspective. While most would say this could just be the other disciples speaking to Matthew and Luke mentioned in biblical canon. Furthermore, as a man named Burton L. Mack said, this extra Greek canon of the letter source states that Jesus was in fact not the Son of God, but simply a man or a sort of sage who went around teaching peace and goodwill. People use this, people use this as an example of Jesus being a fraud. However, I want to down this one a little bit in particular because the only evidence for it is there is one extra book that supposedly is better than all the other books written about it, and also Burton is a jerk, and every interview I found of him was just talking about how stupid anyone who believes in religion are and how they need to shut up and buy his book. So yeah, no. Evidence for this theory is things such as the fact that whenever Jesus was speaking to the disciples, that he told them not to bring extra provisions as they will be provided for. And supposedly in this Q source, it said that the area Jesus was sending them to was areas that he knew people in. So therefore, teachings of charity are discredited by knowing people. I don't know, it's weird. Alternate world ending can have several definitions. However, the primary one that people use whenever they're talking about this is that of the Mayan calendar. For example, as many of you probably know, in 2012 the Mayan calendar ended and supposedly we were supposed to end too, but actually tracing back Mayan history, their calendar was set up differently. So for what would then be the end of 2012, for us is more like 2026, 2027. So don't worry, we could still all get wiped out at once. Streetlight interference, also known as SLI, is a phenomenon that occurs when occasionally certain people can pass streetlights, causing them to either turn on or off. Specifically sodium vapor lights, which are the quintessential ones you think of that sort of glow yellow and have a very distinct hum to them. Theories of this go from everything to psychic abilities, to electrostatic currents in the air, to just the idea that maybe reality doesn't work quite the way we think it does, and certain individuals are capable of certain supernatural phenomena beyond their means. This has been described as a very Fordian concept, and an example of maybe reality isn't our perception of it. Real fluoride dangers is another one of those that it's really hard to find info on. As you dig deeper down the fluoride dangers hole, there comes up theories of losing reproductive capabilities, to IQ damage in children, to kidney shutdown, and things such as. One interesting theory around it is that fluoride over time leads to bone decay and is the primary reason in the United States for hip damage in the elderly. So Yeah, Future Earthworks is an experimental art design done by Japanese artist Mariko Mori. In this art project, she placed these monoliths and sort of sun sphere creations across each of the 6 inhabitable continents. According to her, using celestial charts, whenever Earth will be made anew in whatever great event comes next, these 6 sites are going to be the founding places of humanity. So, make of that what you will. Conspiracy psyops refers to the generally accepted thing that false conspiracies will be put out by state agencies in order to discredit other theories. This was seen in World War II, for example, in which British spies would put out rumors of other people being spies in order to discredit any other rumors that they themselves were. More recently, there's things like the 15 Psychological Operations Group, which was a group operating in the Middle East during the time that Britain was at war with the Taliban, whose entire purpose was in order to propagate disinfo among the local people in order to maintain morale and support for their forces. Obscure video games can be vague. However, I think this is specifically referencing the sort of cursed or illegal video games on the market. Some of them are well known, such as JFK Reloaded, which is a simulation where you play as Lee Harvey Oswald during the JFK shooting. However, more get a bit obscure, such as that is Sad Satan, which was supposedly a game that popped up on the dark web temporarily for download and then disappeared. The game featured real-world clips of people being murdered, of child abductees being abused, so on and so forth, and was apparently a sympathetic game built around the concept of sin and evil being an inherent good. Or at least that's what the records say, because no one can find it now. Alright, sexual assault missiles. I probably can't say this, but I have to talk about it. So whenever I searched this, I was like, this is just going to be an inherent joke. It has to be. And then surprisingly enough, it wasn't. A couple months before the Sandy Hook shooter went on his rampage, he had posted to anonymous boards that he had discovered something the government was working on, which he called sexual assault missiles. He then disappeared, and then 2 months later, the tragedy at Sandy Hook occurred. So that's lead people to theorize, what was he talking about? Was he just insane? Did this all have to do with some government psyop, four-dimensional experiment they were running? No one knows, but those cryptic final words lead to a lot of debate. Circus Real URL is a shock website in a similar vein of Rotten.com. Basically just gore and other obscene content posted on the website by anonymous users. The website was taken down because of its content, but supposedly there is another URL that exists in the dark web that is the same website, only worse. However, there's no evidence of this or a specific URL which I can find, but it's another example of scary dark web evil videos. Singularity has already happened, is in reference to in Tier 2 whenever I spoke about singularity being the point at which we progress so far with AI and technology that there's no return. And reading something like this, you're like, oh, that's a cool theory, it can never happen. And then you realize that there are already developments for neural laces in which chips will be implanted to our brains to connect us to the internet, and it's like, okay, extreme conditioning, again vague, but I believe this is referring to human experiments that took place specifically during World War II, in which it was determined what lengths a person could go to before they succumb to whatever injury. The most common example of this being freezing cold water and how long it took people to die of hypothermia. Supposedly after that, Russian KGB groups and other organizations such as began pushing people to almost that limit in order to build up better human dexterity and therefore a better human. Some of you may be familiar with the Cameraheads creepypasta that went around a few years ago. However, this theory propagates the true story and that the creepypasta was made as a cover-up. It all started with a 4chan post in which someone posted that they had found a backpack in the back of an alley that had a note attached to it that said, "I killed a Camerahead." Attached to that afterwards, it said, "They killed Trevor, and if I'm not back in an hour, send help." Inside of the bag was also a videotape, which the 4chan user posted these screenshots from. That was before the original user had their account banned. All references to Camerahead on the site were taken away, and all mentions of it were censored up until the creepypasta was made, which supposedly cast a blanket of doubt on the whole idea. And while you may be thinking of walking, talking people with giant cameras for heads, I want you to keep the concept of Cameraheads in mind for something that will not be talked about until Tier 9, I believe. So so remember that. Algal biofuel real potential falls in line with the theory that one of the fuel sources that is not being tapped into on purpose in our world is that of algae. Think about it. Supposedly our oceans are full of things such as red algae and green algae that we have no use for. However, we know these to be living structures that can develop energy in some regard, so it would make sense that we could have a capability to harness it. According to this theory, there have been several tests put forward of ways that we could harvest it, and they are immediately and rapidly censored by big oil in order to not lose big oil. Layer cake theory is a theory based off of the layer cake ideology of the American state government. Layer cake is a metaphor used to describe the difference between states' rights and federal rights, in that you have a layer cake in which sometimes states have authority on matters and then sometimes the overarching federal government has an authority on matters. However, theories state that this is all just a facade and that the same people that control the state are the same people that control the Fed, and blah blah blah, evil Satan, lizard, aliens coming to kill you. One of the fun ones, Iraqi stargates. As a bit of background, the Iraqi area or Mesopotamian area was the home of the Sumerian nation. Sumerians worshipped figures known as Anunnakis, which are believed by several modern theorists to be ancient aliens, as they had descriptions of floating palaces and people from the stars appearing and so on and so forth. Also, to call back to a previous theory in this tier, their descriptions of the Anunnaki is very similar to the Dogon tribes. To get more specific with it, there was a ziggurat constructed about 370 kilometers east of Baghdad in a place that is believed by modern historians to be that of Ur, which was one of the original hubs of the Sumerian Empire. Supposedly, the reason that the Sumerians were so much more advanced than the people of their time is because these aliens gave them technology and even built a stargate at this ziggurat in order to transport between worlds. Tie that in more recently, and it's believed by many that one of the reasons Hitler wanted control of the Iraqi Middle Eastern area so much in World War II was because of the ancient alien science, and even specifically to maintain a stargate. This theory keeps going and says that the reason Desert Storm occurred was in order to get American possession of the Iraqi stargate. Bovine poison is exactly what it says. Every year, thousands of cattle die to lead and bracken that are randomly found in their pastures. Most theories fall in line that this is competition from other farms. In other words, one company wants to get rid of another company's supply, so they quite literally poison the cattle. While some go a step further and say it's a means of population control, i.e. big secret agencies poisoning the cattle in order to maintain control of the populace who use them as a food supply. Synchronicity is a very, very, very long concept that I'm going to summarize very shortly. It was an idea that was put forward by psychologist Carl Jung, and is essentially the idea that everything that happens in correlation with other events is for a reason. The example that he used to describe this is while seeing one of his patients, she was describing a dream she had in which she was surrounded by June bugs. While she was telling him this story, he looked out the window and saw a June bug. Now, while most would chalk this up to coincidence, Carl Jung said that this is an example of how the universe has specific instances that it wants to play out. And whenever one of these instances are important, it does things to highlight it. An example could be if whatever greater energy exists within the universe wanted you to go to a specific city, and then people around you began mentioning that city passively in conversation, that would be not a coincidence or divine intervention. Instead, there is universal points that need to be played out, and it is trying to push you towards that direction. Soul healing is the idea that is derived from most original astrologists, that there are some physical ailments that cannot be cured through physical means, but instead have to be derived from the soul. I.e., if your soul is out of shape, your body will begin to manifest diseases until you fix the root problem. This could say that the reason people develop migraines or toothaches or earaches or whatever habitual issue they have is because of an underlying psychological problem. What's interesting is, while it may not be soul healing per se, psychologists have supported this theory that the body will act out in physical ways if psychoanalytics are out of whack. CP soundtrack stands for Cheese Pizza. Supposedly, on a forum years back, someone released a mixtape they had in which the beats were composed of unedited cheese pizza, and of course it was immediately taken down. However, the theory goes a step further and says that several celebrities and musicians who are involved in the cheese pizza ring have used that same audio for me.
We're going to take a break from the conspiracy theory iceberg, and we're going to work on a beat. The series is going to take a while to finish. I told y'all. It took a while to finish. Slowed. post. We're going to repeat 8 times. need a pad or some brass. sounds nice. Alright. Back to the conspiracy theory iceberg. Or should we watch another video? Back to conspiracy theory iceberg. But
that had a note attached to it that said, "I killed a camerahead." Else. Tier 7 is described as the interdimensional monk, and the description reads,
Okay, so we're on tier 7, so we're gonna end it. We're gonna end the iceberg there. We're gonna move on to another video. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to move on to Twitch. I hope you had a good stream. I hope you enjoyed what you liked. I hope you liked what you watched. We're going to play some music on Twitch